Welcome. For Storied Kerry, the big step forward this year was setting up our own website, storiedkerry.com. We rushed out in March to entertain and distract in these strangest of times. Storied Kerry's challenge is to get all of us more aware of our Kerry story and in this way enrich and enhance all of our lives, bonding us more closely with our own place, encouraging us to look at the potentials of our place and playing our part in developing them, getting to know the problems and committing to solving them. So the first step, how do we all become more aware of our Kerry story? The website is one way of doing that. The aim is to publish another Kerry story every Tuesday and Thursday. The ambition is, through our directors from each Kerry district, to encourage all of us to research and present our Kerry story and publish it on storiedkerry.com. Now, after 10 months of doing this, it's time to officially launch the website. This is taking the place of the day-long conference we ran at Halloween in 2018 and 2019 in the very special St Oliver's National School in Killarney. Today we're coming from the prestigious Ceoltas Ceoltóirí Éireann Duchess House at the Institute of Technology in Tralee, the ITT. Today's launch conference will run for less than 45 minutes. The technical preparation, presentation and transmission of this event has since September occupied the students of the Creative Media and Information Technology Department at IT Tralee, which in a few weeks will be part of the Munster Technological University. The students were led by their lecturer, Philip Doyle, the architect of our website. We hope today's event will entertain and excite. It's peppered with storytellers. As well, the aim is to inform and encourage all of us in Kerry to get to know more of our story. Send us your questions to the Storied Kerry Facebook page. You can send your questions or comments now and throughout the launch, and we'll try to answer all of them before the end of the programme. Today's entire proceedings will be permanently up on the website. Let me introduce my co-presenters, Bailey and Alan, who will tell you something about themselves.
Thanks, Frank. We are third-year students studying TV, radio and new media here in the IT Tralee.
And we are delighted to be helping Storied Kerry launch their new website.
Since September, we've been coming here to the Ceoltas building each week in preparation for the live launch.
We did this as part of our TV studio production module, and we'd like to thank Storied Kerry for having us be part of it all.
In April on storiedkerry.com, I learned in Tommy Martin's story that Castle Island, Ilan Kerry, is the island of Kerry, built on limestone with a network of caves. I always thought Kenmare, Nadine, was a little nest. But in his Storied Kerry tale in July, Brendan O'Sullivan has a very different explanation, as you'll now hear.
My name is Brendan O'Sullivan, and today I want to tell you how Nadine got its name. Nadine is the old Gaelic or Irish name for the present-day town of Kenmare. Anybody who visits Kenmare today is taken by the lovely planned town with its brightly coloured shops, world-class restaurants, coffee shops, and great range of shops. In fact, the place is a haven of rest and tranquility. But if we look back through the mists of time, such peace and tranquility did not always reign. Back in those days, there was a gruesome giant in the area by the name of Ain, and he had his lair or his nest or nad near the present-day town of Kenmare, and hence the area became known as Nadine. Ain terrified the natives of the area. He slept in his nest all day and then rambled around the area at night, terrorizing the natives, feasting on their cattle and destroying their crops. Sometimes, when he was particularly bad mood, they had to take refuge in the mountains. They were very tired of this carry-on, so they petitioned the king of the day, Cormac MacArt, to do something about the situation. Cormac sent none other than Fionn McCool, the legendary leader of the Fianna, to deal with Ain. Fionn arrived on a beautiful white steed full of razzmatazz and bluster and all the kind of things that goes with heroes. Ain was unimpressed. To show off his strength and power, he hurled huge rocks at Fionn across the Rugby Valley. Not to be outdone, Fionn flung back rocks at Ain. Some of these missiles are still pointed out to this day, in particular Carrigacappeen and Clochevara. If size is anything to judge by, those who flung these missiles must have been very powerful men indeed. Eventually, a gruesome battle ensued, which lasted for several days. So fierce was the fighting that they made the hard ground soft and the soft ground hard. Eventually, Fionn managed to slay Ain and to rid Nedine of the gruesome giant. The natives were so impressed that they built a special stone cradle for Fionn, which can still be seen beside the town. Fionn appears to have been very impressed with the welcome he received, and afterwards became a regular visitor to the town, and indeed brought the Fianna with him. As evidence of this, there are several sites in the area which bear association to this period. Loch Bryn, in particular, where one of Fionn's dogs got drowned, being a case in point. Indeed, an old man told me that it was Fionn McCool himself started the current tourist trend in Kenmare and indeed in Kerry in general.
In September, Jessica Hamilton told StoriedKerry.com of her first encounter with a water dog pre-dawn along the canal in Tralee. As you'll now hear, Donal Hickey revealed that the Great Yew in Muckross was built on the grave of a monk who slept for 100 years.
Okay, my name is Donal Hickey, and I have an interest in local history and journalism. I spent my working life as a journalist, and now I occupy my time working on history and heritage and different projects. And this story is about the famous yew tree in Muckross Abbey in Killarney. One of the upsides of the COVID-19 pandemic is that people have become much more aware of their own immediate environment. Limits on travel and activity have localized people, with the result that they are walking more in their own localities and seeing things they had never even noticed before. I know, for instance, pensioners who have lived in Killarney for all or most of their days and who, prior to the crisis, had never walked through the domain, though this wondrous place is just a short stroll from the town centre. And many such people have been to Muckross Abbey only for funerals. But now that they are venturing out and finding new and even mysterious corners, they have come to discover what is probably Killarney's oldest yew tree. The tree, which could also be one of the oldest of the species to be found anywhere in Ireland, stands right in the centre of Muckross Abbey. Some experts believe it to be up to 400 years old. Even 2.5 centuries ago, this venerable tree was famous, and some of the first tourists to come to Killarney were captivated by it. In 1756, one such personage, Charles Smith, wrote that it was one of the tallest yew trees he had ever seen. Its spreading branches, like a great umbrella, overshadow the niches of this great cloister, he went on. The exact foundation of the Franciscan Abbey at Muckross is uncertain. It could be any time between 1340 and 1448. There's a deal of folklore and superstition surrounding this tree, including a tradition that it was removed from Innisfallen. There is a deal of folklore and superstition surrounding this tree, including a tradition that it was removed from Innisfallen as a sapling and planted in the heart of the abbey. In his celebrated book, Heritage Trees of Ireland, Aubrey Fennell noted a tradition that the tree was planted over the grave of a monk who had been absent for 100 years and returned there to die. And there's a legend that the miraculous image of the Virgin Mary is buried underneath, and that anyone who damaged the tree would die within a year. This warning went unheeded by an unfortunate soldier who hacked off a small branch which dripped with blood, and he promptly dropped dead on the spot, according to the legend. Believe the folklore or not, there is something special about this yew which has attracted people ever since visitors started coming to Killarney in the middle of the 18th century. The tree is straight and solid, and the branches stretch out from it to cover the surrounding walls. It seems the monks kept the tree topped and the branches trimmed whilst they were resident in the abbey, but it grew more and more after they abandoned the place in the 17th century. There is no simple formula for dating an individual yew tree, as one can be very different from the other in terms of age. But this tree must be at least 350 years old. Let's hope that the special tree receives the respect it deserves. Sinead.
On StoriedKerry.com in August, Carl O'Flaherty took us over the broken bridge in Dingle Harbour on a youthful adventure through a historic landscape. And now, from the Killorglin district, Owen O'Shea tells of the Kilclahan portal tomb, dating from 4000 BC, which, Owen says, informs his sense of his place and connects him and everybody living in his area with their archaeological heritage.
My name is Owen O'Shea. According to the French philosopher Gabriel Marcel, an individual is not too distinct from his place. He is his place. My place has always been part of who I am. Milltown at the centre of County Kerry is a place rich with an archaeological heritage and landscape which provides a strong and binding sense of place, a series of features, buildings, ruins, monuments, and a topography which grounds those who live and who have lived there. One cannot have grown up in or lived in Milltown without being impressed, moved and inspired by its archaeological fabric, which underpins that sense of place. The Mass Rock at Paulinaffrin in Kilclahan Wood, where Father Thaddeus Moriarty was arrested for saying Mass in 1653 and tried and hanged under the repressive penal laws. The 13th century Abbey of Our Lady of Labello Loco at Callaha, built in the reign of King John and home to the Canons Regular of St. Augustine, it was attacked by Cromwellian forces during the Irish Confederate Wars, but its evocative ruins and iconic east window remain. The old walls and remains of the Godfrey estate at Kilcolman, once home to Kilcolman Abbey, and a family whose history and that of Milltown are symbiotic. The newly discovered evidence at Lissaniska Ringfort about the ancient local tradition of growing flax, shining a light on Milltown's first farmers of thousands of years ago. But more than any of these or other parts of the local heritage in my home place, the thousands of years old portal tomb of Kilclahan continues to fascinate and appeal to my sense of place. Sometimes we do not see or appreciate what is under our noses. The portal tomb at Kilclahan is just a few hundred yards from where I was born and reared. It was always known as the Dolmen when I was a child, perhaps because that is precisely what it looked like, two upright supporting stones with a large flat capstone on top. It was a place which drew visitors from afar, those with an interest in heritage, but those who lived nearby knew little of its importance, until a few years ago, that is. Coincidentally, I found myself at the centre of the revelations about the true significance of the tomb at Kilclahan. As a journalist with Radio Kerry, I heard a rumour that there was an excavation at the tomb, that work was being done to investigate its significance. Could it have been that the tomb which I grew up beside and often passed by on a walk had a greater importance than anyone realised? I was led to the county archaeologist, Dr. Michael Connolly. For weeks, he and his team had been excavating the site on the lands of my neighbour, Ken O'Neill. Ken had noticed cracks in one of the uprights and contacted Michael Connolly, fearful that the enormous capstone, weighing 15 tons, was about to collapse. Days later, I was standing with my Radio Kerry microphone interviewing Michael Connolly beside the Kilclahan tomb. Among the many astonishing revelations of the excavations were that the structure was a portal tomb and dated to almost 4000 BC, some 6,000 years ago, making it the oldest surviving structure in County Kerry and the county's oldest place of burial. It's believed to be one of the most important such sites in all of Ireland. The story made the national and international media when it broke. Killeclahan and Miltown were making worldwide news. I took great pride in being a local resident and a local journalist who broke the news of this historic discovery to the world. Work is now underway on a second portal tomb nearby, deep in the forestry of Killeclahan Wood, and the potential for further revelations enthralls and excites. Inspired by the portal tomb and the discoveries, a few years ago the local branch of Cultus Kiltory Éirden decided to host an evening of music, song, poetry and reflection at the site of the tomb. It took place appropriately on the summer solstice, the 21st of June. It was an enchanting and invigorating reconnection with the past, set against the sun-kissed and sweeping majesty of Caherconree, Slieve of Mish, and the harbour of Castlemaine. Like the ongoing discovery of archaeological treasures in Egypt, so too do the people of my home place come to find out more about their place, their ancestors and those who walked and first farmed the fertile lands of the main valley. Mythology, folklore and archaeology will continue to tie and connect us to the people who walked and farmed the lands which we now call home. The tomb at Killeclahan forces me and all of us to remember and reflect upon our ancient roots and those who came before us millennia ago. In the words of the American novelist Wendell Berry, if you don't know where you are, you don't know who you are.
Since last March, the Storied Kerry directors from each of the 8 districts that Kerry naturally divides into have been encouraging people in their district to research and tell their Kerry story. As well, directors and others have acted as topic editors. There was all sorts of other story activity throughout the county, looking at creating storied communities, commercial concerns and public bodies, as well as communities, looking at developing story houses, collecting nun stories, using Sonnet Lumiere to tell the Christian story. To give you an idea of the activities, Micheál Ó Cuileáin tells of some of what went on story-wise in his district on Dingle over the past year.
Hello, my name is Micheál Ó Cuileáin and I am the representative of Storied Kerry for Corcagreena or for West Kerry. And I'm just going to give you an indication very briefly of some of the activities we have been involved in over the past 12 months. Obviously with COVID, our plans have been restricted. We had initially started to discuss with the local library about having a storytelling session for children and adults throughout the summer, which the local arts festival, Féile na Bealtaine, was going to pay for. And obviously we're hoping to kick that again into next year and maybe into the following year also. The Arts Festival Féile na Bealtaine, which we have close links to, had chosen the theme of Legends of Ireland for the street theatre parade, which is a central part of the festival. A lot of work has been done on that. We're not quite sure whether we will hold the parade in 2021 or whether we will put the props on display, highlighting some of the legends that are of national importance, but also the local stories and the local legends. And each school and many artists are involved in that. So there are 2 projects that were started and we hope to get back to them. We've also been very active on the website, Storied Kerry, and we have 7 stories online dealing with aspects of folklore, archaeology, flora and fauna, Bailidis from the Dingle Peninsula. We started off looking at something as simple as wild garlic and highlighting in these pandemic times that in 1919, just over 100 years ago, many people in West Kerry kept a clove of wild garlic in their pocket to protect them against the flu. We looked at the historical references to wild garlic. We looked at some of the uses that it has, both past and present. We then had a local guide, Kevin O'Shea, talk to us about the links between legend and language and landscape when he looked at the Battle of Ventry, and he brought in all of the place names that are associated with the battle and where people are said to have been on lookout, and gave a different angle on the whole story of the Battle of Ventry. We also had a story from Robordo Cahasig, who is a folklorist and a lecturer in Mary I in Limerick, now retired. And he looked at the holy wells of Kinnaird, of which there are 3. One dedicated to Mary, one to Michael, and one to Fionn. And St. Michael and St. Fionn were said to have been lost crossing Dingle Bay from Skellig Island one day in mist. And they landed on a patch of land and they weren't quite sure where they were, but they were thirsty. And they climbed uphill a little until they found a well which sated their thirst. And Michael and Fionn then protected that area of land, which is Kinnaird in the parish of Lispole, just east of Dingle. And it protected people who lived in the area from their enemies and, interestingly enough, from all plagues. And again, just over 100 years ago during the Spanish flu, many people went to these wells on particular dates in February and August and in September as a cure for the flu. So they link into the current pandemic that we have as well. We also looked at some of the fishing traditions and superstitions associated with fishing on the Dingle Peninsula, where when you were at sea, it was being in a different realm. You were no longer on land, therefore language couldn't have the same use. And fishermen are very, very superstitious, and there were certain words that they would simply not use while at sea. And they would use the term cold iron, as we would say touch wood on land. On sea, they referred to cold iron. They would never refer to a priest while at sea. They would never refer to specific types of fish. Salmon, for instance, was always referred to as the gentleman or the fellows. But never would you mention a fox, a hare, a badger, and a whole series of animals. We know of the tradition that you never mentioned the colour red when you were at sea, and meeting a red-headed woman on your way to your boat in the morning was bad luck. But even if you had the name with the word red or rua, Oscailge, in it, that was a bad omen. So for instance, we have a story of Pats Goheen, who was from the Blasket Islands, a fisherman, and he was known as Pats Rua because of the colour of his hair. But when Pats was at sea, they would never refer to him as Pats Rua because of the ill luck it would bring, and he was known as Pats Ildahak, or brightly coloured Pat. So these are little things that are picked up locally. Not many people would know of them, and Storied Kerry brings them to a wider audience. We asked Carl Flaherty, who has published a number of books on the Dingle Peninsula, to look at an aspect, an area of the landscape known as the Broken Bridge locally, where as kids growing up in Dingle, we would have rowed back there and we would have cycled back there. It's between Dingle and the old estate house of Lord Ventry near Burnham. And he tells the story of growing up there nearby as a child, being aware of the bird life and the plants that grow in the area, and the story that the bridge was broken in the 1860s because Lord Ventry's wife didn't like the inconvenience or the invasion of privacy. When local people were burying their dead, they had to cross the bridge to get into the nearby burial place at Raheny Huig, and she knocked down the bridge and made them go around so that they wouldn't come near her house. So we're looking at aspects like that. We looked at Ferreters Cove, some of the archaeology on the Dingle Peninsula, the earliest site that we have back there. A chance find of a geologist walking on the coast one day and finding a piece of stone that later starts 9 years of excavations, reveals the earliest settlers in Kerry, certainly on the Dingle Peninsula, and it has revealed the oldest cattle bone in Ireland and in the UK to date, going back to about 4,600 BC. And finally, the story we looked at more recently was the unique Lusitanian flora and fauna of the area, where the local expert, Bernie Goggin, highlighted the uniqueness of the Kerry slug and certain plants such as the butterworth and the saxifrage that grow on the Connor Pass. And the next place south that they're found is in the northwest of Spain in Galicia. So we're linked not just by the sea, but through some of the flora and the fauna. The explanation of how it gets there has never been fully solved, whether it is brought up on the shoreline, whether it is in packaging that early peoples travelling may have used to package their goods, we don't know. But there's this very clear link between Galicia and Ireland through our unique flora and fauna. So there's some of the things that we've been active at on the Dingle Peninsula, and we hope in 2021 to continue with more of the same. Thank you.
I hope you're enjoying the show so far. Alan and I will now be joined by Frank to answer any of the questions you may have, so feel free to submit on our socials. I see our first question is coming in from Margaret Gavin. She asks, do I have to be from Kerry to write and learn about it?
Well, while our particular aim is obviously to make Kerry people more aware of the story, but there are two sides to that. One is that we get Kerry people more aware, but that needs to be supplied with stories. So if you have a story about Kerry or about an aspect of Kerry in one of the areas that we've outlined earlier, then and that is probably associated with a particular part of the county, get in touch with the district director from that area and they'll be delighted to get the story, because you're providing a story to make the rest of us more aware of it. And you'll find all of the information up on the storiedkerry.com website.
We've another question coming in here from Tindy. He says, as a filmmaker, how can he get involved with Storied Kerry?
Well, today's a good example of that. I mean, look at the storytellers that you've seen today from Kenmare, from the Listowel district, from the Killarney district, from the Killorglin district as well. Certainly, film is a hugely important part. We'd be delighted to get people, but bear in mind to keep the story short and to the point, ideally less than 3 minutes, but certainly absolute maximum 5 minutes. And again, get in touch with your area director. All of the information is up on storiedkerry.com. But we would be delighted. We would love to get both oral material and visual material. Please do get in touch.
So our next question is from Sarah Hearn. She asks, I have never written anything. Can I get a story on storiedkerry.com?
Well, our special aim is to encourage all of us who are not writers, who are not experts, to tell our story. The aim is not to get an expert view or a perfect piece of writing. Storied Kerry started to encourage all of us to get to know more about our story and then to tell it orally, visually, or in writing. Which is not to say that we're not interested in hearing from the writer or the expert. They also have a vital role to play. So again, if you want to get more information, get in touch with your area director, look up storiedkerry.com.
Sheila got in touch and asked, I'm no good at writing. How can I tell my Kerry story?
Well, there are all sorts of ways. I mean, you might, as a writer, be the kind of person who is going to write the story, but there are all sorts of ways of doing that. You can record it in less than 5 minutes, as I've been saying, and Storied Kerry will publish it. Or if you're good at making a video or film, we'd love to publish your story of 3 to 5 minutes maximum, as I've just been saying. Might your strength be on the research side? Maybe you would do some work in that kind of area. Maybe you might be part of a group to dramatize the story. You could tell the story in your own special way. But either yourself or as part of a group, get involved in a whole range of ways. And if you have suggestions that I haven't mentioned, great. We'd love to hear from those as well.
So we have time for one more question. Sean would like to know, or Sean would like you to explain, Frank, what a story house would be like.
Well, the kind of building and the focus will be different everywhere, just like storied communities. It might be in a heritage, arts or community centre. It might be a house or a church or a school. It could be purpose-built as a focal point in a heritage park. While the particular focus will be different, it will always have a comprehensive library of local story, oral and visual, as well as in writing, where there'll be a constant research and collection of further material. It will be a place where, or from where, the local story will be imaginatively interpreted for a contemporary audience. It will have a dynamic programme of activities, exhibitions, lectures, training, performances. It will be a hub from which the local story can be toured. There are a whole lot of different ways in which, and there will be different focuses in different places.
Thank you so much for all your comments and questions that you sent in. It's great to see such a positive response online. Now, bringing it back, published on storiedkerry.com in June, Caught Coffee told a contemporary story of a younger brother's painful experience with the evil of drink. Now to the Listowel district, Joe Murphy tells us a folk story from his life on the farm.
Hello, my name is Joe Murphy from Listowel. I used to be known for 30 years as Vicar Joe because I ran St. John's Theatre and Arts Centre in Listowel. and now I have retired and I spend all my time farming here at Inch, which is farming was always my first love. And I'm devoted to that now, apart from a little work in dramatics and so forth and so on. Back in the late 1950s, John B. Keane wrote about the changing in Irish farming when he said that the servant boy was throwing off the traces and taking to the high road and wearing a collar and tie. The servant girl was wearing powder and perfume and small frilly garments under her clothes. So those were the changes that he noticed at the time. He also said that the cow is the mistress of Ireland. And indeed, the whole farming community and indeed the wider community are attached to the cow for her food and for her comfort, and all their labour is zoned in on that wonderful creature, the mistress of Ireland, the cow. Now, in the 50s and 60s, most of the work on Irish farms, as we know, was done by horses, horsepower, the privilege of horses only. But gradually, as time went by, the tractor came in and made the horse somewhat redundant. The first tractors to appear in the rural Ireland would have been the old grey Massey Ferguson, the TVO, the Fordson Dexter, very popular with a lot of small farmers, and then the Fordson Major, which was very popular with agricultural contractors. They weren't known as agricultural contractors, of course, that time. They went out and worked for hire. And one of the earlier contractors in this area in North Kerry was a man by the name of Jeremiah Gallivan. Now, Jeremiah Gallivan ploughed for people. He drew gravel out of the river for roads for people, and he loaded his gravel not with a loader, but with a shovel. He also had a binder for cutting corn, and he had the last operating threshing machine here in North Kerry. And in actual fact, the last place he threshed before he immigrated to America in the early 60s was on our farm. But there was a man, shortly after that, a man arrived on the scene who revolutionized farming as far as we were concerned in this little corner of the woods. And that was a man by the name of Johnny Buckley. Now, Johnny Buckley was the son of a farmer from Kilgarvan, Ballylongford. He immigrated to America in the 50s, and he worked in a variety of jobs. He worked with a farmer in Montana. He drove a Greyhound bus, and he drove a truck across America delivering goods. And he very much took onto himself the American way of life, the American way of speaking, the American way of thinking about things and thinking outside the box. So having spent about 8 years in America, Johnny arrived home with a bag full of dollars. And how did he spend it? His spending was inspired, you might say, by what he had seen in America. And as far as mechanization was concerned in America, on farms in particular, Cyrus Hall McCormick was the top dog. So we're talking about international harvesters. And the first thing Johnny did when he arrived home in 1959 or 60 was to buy the biggest tractor in the whole of North Kerry. And that was an international harvester, McCormick, international harvester 450B. And he strode the world like a colossus, sitting up on that. He was like Fionn McCool on his chariot as he drove the road. It was a huge tractor at the time, big bonnet out in front of him. It was the bonnet was the height of a man's head, and the seat was well back behind the back wheels almost. And a very impressive figure he cut as he went about the roads. No cabs and tractors, of course, those days. So you had a good view of the countryside, and the countryside had a good view of him. The other item of engineering that he introduced, as well as the tractor, was a baler. A B46 it was known as. And of course, balers were never seen in the country before this time. And what the baler did was it got rid of the fellas for having to make winds of hay, because as we all know, it was winds of hay up to that point in time. You had to have the mehel. The fellas came in over the ditch and they helped you to wind your hay, and you gave them tea and currant bread and pinters of mixed bread in the shade of the wine when the work was all over. Now, the baler got rid of all that. It didn't get rid of it so much. As we know, the servant boys and the servant girls had immigrated. They had gone to work in towns and factories, and so the farmer had nobody really to help him with the work. And he was ending up doing an awful lot of it himself. So when the baler arrived on the scene, it was a godsend, because one man and his tractor, Johnny, could pull into a field 5 or 6 or 7 acres of hay, and he'd have it all baled in 2 or 3 hours, and all you'd have to do is stack the bales and draw them in. So it was a wonderful invention, and the farmers were delighted with it. And of course, there was awful pressure to try to get Johnny to come and bale your hay, because when the fine weather came, all the farmers cut their hay at the same time, and they wanted it baled at the same time, which was a slight impossibility. So if you had Johnny working in your farm, you could have 4 or 5 fellas coming and saying, "Did you see any sign of Johnny Buckley around? I have hay down and 'tis going to rain." And there was a famous story of a fella from Lizelton who had hay down and it was going to rain, but he had one of these weather clocks, or as they used to call it, a glass. And if the mercury rose up high in the glass, the weather would be fine. And if it dropped, rain and your hay in an awful state. So what used to man do if he saw the glass dropping, he'd take it off of the wall and he'd shake the daylights out of it so that the mercury would rise, and if the mercury rose, the weather would get good, or so he thought. But that was not always the case. So a great advantage in those days, if you were looking for the baler, was if you happened to have a couple of daughters in the house, maybe of marriageable age or around that time in life. And people always said that wherever there was daughters in the house, those fellas were guaranteed to get their hay baled first. Another innovation that Johnny had, of course, was the mowing bar for cutting the hay instead of the old horse and mowing bar. He had a mowing bar on the tractor, and he introduced a new concept he introduced there, and that was he'd only edge maybe once every 2 or 3 days, sharpen the knives and the mowing bar, he'd work away for 2 or 3 days with it. Prior to that, you'd have one fella up on the tractor cutting the hay, and another fella in the headland under a bush, and he edging a spare knife. And then when he'd have it edged, he'd put it under a sop of hay, because they said if the sun rays hit the new edge, it would wipe it off of the blade, so you had to save that. Another innovation that he brought was the rotavator, of course, and this was a Howard 60-inch rotavator. And many of the Haggart and many of the garden he came into and drove through them and got rid of briars and bushes and all kinds of rubbish places that had overgrown with years and years. That was the way Johnny worked, and he was often asked, when you'll be out working for farmers, you'll be invited in for tea or for something to eat. How would you decide which houses would you decide to go into? And which houses would you decide maybe not to go into at all? Well, he had a very clever answer for that, mathematical in nature and requires some thinking about. And the way he put it was the frequency of his visits to the houses was in direct proportion to the size of the garments on the clothesline. And that's the way he worked it. So the hay eventually has given away to the silage, of course, in the 1960s and 70s, and all the crops that were sat by the farmers that time for the ploughing, and the turnips and mangels and oats and barley and wheat and all that, most of that is purchased now in bulk from merchants. So a big change indeed. So, and as we mentioned in the start, the mistress of Ireland, the cow, has finally abandoned the Long Acre and come into the parlour. And that's where she is at the moment. And if archaeologists in the future are maybe another couple of 1,000 years' time rooting around North Kerry and wondering what all these places were, these milking parlours and these silage outfits and big yards, they'll be saying to themselves, who occupied these? It must have been a great empress, or it must have been a very powerful person because of the size and the nature of this palatial abode that they had inhabited. But of course, we all know that the mistress of Ireland was the occupant and will be the occupant for many days to come. That's it. So there we are, Sinead Scale.
Special thanks to our Storied Kerry sponsors, the trustees of Bucker's House, Radio Kerry, and the Gleneagle Hotel Group. Today's event was brought to you by the students of the Creative Media and Information Technology Department in the ITT, which on January the 1st becomes part of the Munster Technological University. Thanks to my fellow presenters, Bailey and Alan, and their fellow students for their expertise, friendship, and dedicated help. We're particularly indebted to their lecturer, Philip Doyle. You've seen how professional they were today, and all of it in about 42 minutes. We promised less than 45. Special thanks to my fellow Storied Kerry directors, to all who are researching and presenting their take on their Kerry story, to our topic editors, to our technology editor, Jennifer Burke, to Coltis Kjoltori Erin, from whose magnificent Dukas house in the ITT MTU we're coming to you today. After all of that, the Storied Kerry webpage is well and truly launched. We hope it will encourage everybody in Kerry to research and present their Kerry story, orally, visually, and or in writing. It would be great if it encouraged partnerships. One person good at the research, somebody else might be good at emailing or recording or filming. A third at presenting the story, drama groups with their unique telling of the Kerry story. There is no better way to get to know more of our Kerry story than getting involved yourself in some sort of way. This will help to entertain and distract in this time when we need to be entertained and distracted. By researching and presenting, we will add to the archive of story in each district and in the county as a whole. As well, if each of us doesn't record our Kerry story, then our unique personal perspective will be lost. The ways in which we become aware of our story are infinite, as mentioned already. Headlines for further virtual gatherings might be biddies in February, perhaps looking at marking the Civil War in Kerry, St. Brendan in May, Lunasa in August, and Halloween in November. Storied Kerry is a group of volunteers who've come together to help make all of us more aware of our story, but it won't happen unless all of us get involved. Storied Kerry will help in any way we can. All information and contact details on storiedkerry.com. Today's full launch will be up on the Storied Kerry website. From all in Storied Kerry, the students and Philip Doyle in the Creative Media and Information Technology Department of the ITT, from all of us to all of you, Happy Christmas.